Hey, welcome back to another episode of Metabolic Mindset. In this episode, I want to cover how to set calories and macros. I also want to discuss generalized hydration and sodium targets. And then at the end, briefly, just sort of a little subsection on how to determine when it's actually appropriate to adjust your macros or your calories. The content in this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It's not personalized nutrition advice. It's not medical advice. It's not a substitute for working with a qualified healthcare professional. The opinions expressed in this are my own, and they don't represent the views of my employer or any professional organizations. I'm Shara Perry. I'm a registered dietitian. I have a pro-metabolic approach to nutrition, and this is the Metabolic Mindset podcast. So first off, when I say pro-metabolic and in general, a lot of times it's called a pro-metabolic framework or a pro-metabolic diet, but it's not a universally accepted medical nutrition therapy model. The physiology that I'll be discussing in this podcast is largely mainstream physiology, so things like energy balance, adaptive thermogenesis, thyroid function, NEAT, protein requirements, hydration, etc. But the interpretation and the application are my pro-metabolic lens as a practitioner. So how I determine calories, the first thing I like to do with someone is to estimate their maintenance calories, and then we can go from there based off of their goals. And I typically use Mifflin-St Jeor over some of the more simple body weight multipliers, because it is one of the most researched and widely accepted predictive equations that we have for estimating resting energy expenditure. The important thing to understand, though, is that Mifflin-St Jeor does not calculate maintenance calories, and we'll get into that, so pay attention to it when I'm talking about it. It estimates the resting metabolic rate, or sometimes called resting energy expenditure. And this is really, really important because I'll often get clients that will have calculated their resting metabolic rate, or they get it from something like an InBody or a DEXA scan, and that does not account for a lot of things that we'll get into. But remember, Mifflin-St Jeor does not calculate your maintenance calories. You have to do some additional calculations on top of that. Resting metabolic rate, which it does calculate or estimate, is the amount of energy that your body requires at rest, just mainly to support your basic physiological functions. So breathing, heart function, brain activity, liver function, kidney function, cellular maintenance. In other words, if you were laying in a bed all day long doing absolutely nothing, the RMR, or resting metabolic rate, is approximately what you would burn. So let's talk about Mifflin-St Jeor, which again is my personal preference. Before Mifflin-St Jeor, the most commonly used equation was the Harris-Benedict equation, which was developed in 1919. The problem with that is that the population used to create Harris-Benedict looked very different from our modern population. So body composition, average body weight, physical activity levels, and obesity prevalence have changed dramatically over the last century. And by the late 1980s and 1990s, researchers realized that those newer equations were needed, right? That one's not really working anymore. So in 1990, researchers Mifflin-St Jeor, Hill, Scott, Dougherty, I swear I probably incorrectly pronounced that name and I'm sorry, and co. published a study titled, and that's co, K-O-H, not co, C-O, published a study titled A New Predictive Equation for Resting Energy Expenditure in Healthy Individuals. And the goal was really simple. So create an equation that more accurately predicts resting energy expenditure in modern adults. So they measured actual resting metabolic rates using indirect calorimetry, another word that I struggle with, calorimetry. You hear people, it just rolls off their tongue. I don't know how they do it. And they compared various predictive equations using that indirect calorimetry. We can't do it. Their newly developed equation outperformed many of the older formulas, and more than 30 years later, it remains one of the most commonly recommended equations in nutrition and dietetics. So a lot of dietitians are going to be using this formula. All right, the actual formula is really annoying, and you should just go on to a website calculator and calculate it. You don't need to know this. Of course, we had to do this a bunch in graduate school, but for women, RMR, in case you just want to write this down because you're a super nerd and you don't know how the internet works, you can't look it up. RMR is 10 times your weight in kilograms times 6.25 times your height in centimeters minus 5 times your age minus 161. And then it's a little bit different for men. Same base equation, but you add 5 instead of subtracting 161. Okay, why are those the variables? So the equation only uses body weight, height, age, sex. No body fat percentage, no muscle mass measurements, no metabolic testing. And it's because the researchers wanted a formula that could be easily used in clinical practice. So, like what I do. This is also really good for when you're not super familiar with your client and their lifestyle yet. You can use this equation, and it can generally apply to give you starting macros. And we'll talk more about that. Starting calories. So each one of those variables is going to independently influence energy expenditure. Weight, so larger bodies require more energy to maintain. And that's just because more tissue generally means more metabolic activity. Height, so height helps account for body size independent of weight. So a 180-pound person at 5'3" is likely very different from a 180-pound person at 6'2". So age, metabolic rate tends to decline with age. And part of that decline is related to things like reduced muscle mass, reduced activity, changes in organ mass over time, and changes in hormone status. And then they factor in sex as well. So men generally have more lean body mass and less body fat than women at the same body weight. All right. So example calculation, just going to run you through this. So if we have a female that's 43 years old, 176 pounds and 5'3", the first thing we do is convert weight to kilograms, and you just divide pounds by 2.2 if you're already in kilograms. Congratulations. Step 2, we convert height to centimeters. So we do 5'3" is 160 centimeters. And I have to look that up. I always forget how to convert feet into centimeters. I just look it up. And then you insert the values into that equation that I mentioned earlier. So for this female, 43 years old, 176 pounds, 5'3", 1,424 calories. And that means that her body is likely to burn approximately, keyword approximately, 1,424 calories daily at rest. So let's talk about why that resting metabolic rate is not your maintenance calories. Please know it's not your maintenance calories. RMR is only one component of your total daily energy expenditure. And total daily energy expenditure, or how you'll see it written down sometimes, is TDEE. It's the total number of calories that you burn in an entire day. And it's usually divided into 4 major categories. So you've got resting metabolic rate, or RMR, which is typically around 60 to 70% of most people's TDEE. And then you have the thermic effect of food. So that's the energy that's required to digest food. And it's typically, for most people, around 8 to 12% of their total daily energy expenditure. We have exercise activity thermogenesis, or EAT, and that's concerted workouts. I love that word, EAT. The abbreviation is EAT. And for most people, their concerted workouts are typically about 5 to 15% of their total daily energy expenditure, but it's going to vary, right? Because you might have a person that's sedentary or an extreme ridiculous athlete. The fourth component of the total daily energy expenditure is my favorite thing ever, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT, what you reply to someone if you're being passive aggressive. Hey, that's neat. I think of it, I remember it that way. It's passive. So it's walking, standing, fidgeting, housework, your daily movement that you're not necessarily accounting for in terms of your concerted physical activity. And that varies dramatically between individuals. I talked about that in another episode, but some people will naturally fidget a ton. All right, so how do we then convert the RMR that you get, the resting metabolic rate that you get from a lot of these like in-body scans and DEXAs, to maintenance calories? What do we need to maintain our current weight? So we're going to multiply that RMR by an activity factor. So if you're sedentary, it's 1.2. If you're lightly active, it's 1.3 to 1.4. Moderately active, 1.5 to 1.6. And then very active, 1.7 to 1.9. So using our example of the woman from earlier, she's moderately active. So we would do 1.5 times 1,424, her resting, and you get 2,136 calories. That is her estimated maintenance calories. And again, you can just Google Mifflin-St Jeor calorie calculator, okay? And then remember that if you're ever using RMR, you have to multiply that by an activity factor. So some advantages of Mifflin-St Jeor: it's evidence-based. It was developed from actual metabolic testing. It's widely validated. Numerous studies have compared it against indirect calorimetry. Oh my gosh, I said it right that time. It just flew out. It's easy to use, so it requires only 4 variables, and it's much, 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 much better than guessing. Many people are going to underestimate or overestimate the calorie needs significantly, and the equation provides sort of an objective starting point. Keywords, starting point. It is more accurate than Harris-Benedict as well, so for modern populations, Mifflin-St Jeor often performs much better, and that's one reason why organizations like the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics are going to frequently reference it. All right, some limitations, because there's always limitations. It's going to predict population averages, and this is a real problem for me in practice, especially if I'm working with athletes. It does not predict your metabolism. It predicts the metabolism of someone that's statistically similar to you, and those are not always the same thing. It doesn't account for body composition either, so we'll look at an example. If we had 2 women and both of them are 160 pounds, they're both 5'5", and they're both 40 years old. One is 20% body fat and the other is 40% body fat. They're likely going to have very different energy expenditures. Okay, but if they use this equation, it's going to give them the same answer. It doesn't account for adaptive thermogenesis, which I've talked about in a few of my other podcasts. If you don't know what adaptive thermogenesis is, you might want to listen to those or just do a cursory Google search. That's a huge pro-metabolic discussion. So the equation assumes a relatively normal metabolic state, and which is hardly ever the clients that I actually get. And it doesn't know whether someone has been dieting for years or if they've recently lost 100 pounds or if they have suppressed NEAT, maybe because of medications or what's going on in their life. So the equation just doesn't account for all of these other things that you eventually learn about someone if you're doing extensive nutrition counseling. All right. It also doesn't, just lots of limitations. It also doesn't account for large changes in activity. So a person who sits all day versus a person who's walking 15,000 steps daily, they may have dramatically different maintenance calories despite similar demographics. So how I would teach people to use this, it's a starting point. it's not a definitive answer. It's not going to just pop out the exact amount of calories that you need to eat to maintain your weight. We would first calculate your RMR, your resting metabolic rate. We would then estimate your maintenance, set your calories, and stick to it. And we're going to talk about this more at the end of this podcast, but observe your physiology and adjust is a really important part that a lot of people are leaving out of this. And it's just that you can't often stay at the same macros and calories long term because your metabolism is going to adjust, life situation is going to adjust, activity is going to adjust. You have to move it around, which is why I have a job. Another thing I see often is that people will immediately slash calories every time. We want the smallest effective deficit possible. And research consistently shows that larger deficits are going to increase hunger, fatigue, they're going to increase muscle loss risk, big problem with GLP-1s, and adaptive thermogenesis. So the body's going to regulate and get used to this lower calorie amount, especially when someone's doing long-term dieting. So it's the body's tendency to reduce energy expenditure during long-term dieting in particular. So the famous Minnesota starvation experiment demonstrated dramatic reductions in energy expenditure, body temperature, libido, mood, and spontaneous activity during prolonged caloric restriction. And more recent research from Rosenbaum and Liebel has confirmed that metabolic adaptation is a real phenomenon. So for fat loss clients, I'm generally beginning with a 10 to 20% deficit. And I mean, not like 40 or 50%. We don't want a starvation diet. We just want a little slight deficit to get someone moving in the right direction. We don't want to wreck their metabolism by doing a 40 to 50% reduction in calories. And that's not necessarily an issue that I see with other dietitians. It's more an issue with someone who doesn't understand metabolism. So like if a client were just to look up these equations, they might start off way, way lower than they need to, and it ends up being detrimental. Deciding the percentage deficit is another reason why I have a job. So if I explain the complexity of that, it would be a horrifically long episode. But if you're kind of wondering where do I start with a deficit, I would generally err on the side of a tiny, tiny deficit, 10 to 20%. Go on the lower end of that. Start with 10% and see how your body does with a 10% reduction before you jump and do the high end, right? All right, how do we set protein? This is the easiest macro to set. The research is remarkably consistent on this. And protein, what it's going to do is preserve your lean mass during weight loss. It's really important. It's going to increase satiety, which your feelings of being full throughout the day. And it has the highest thermic effect of food. It's going to support your recovery. It's going to support muscle growth. I think many of us know that protein is important. The issue is people lately, the issue that I see is all of the marketing around protein and people thinking that they need to eat 200-300 grams of protein. You don't need to eat 200 or 300 grams of protein. So meta-analyses from Morton and colleagues suggest muscle growth appears to, this is really, and please lock in. Muscle growth appears to plateau at around 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight, with an upper confidence limit around 2.2 grams per kilogram. So for most of my clients, I do 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of their goal body weight. So 1 is an easy calculation. If you, let's say you want to be 135 pounds, 135 grams of protein. It's real simple. And I find that to be effective for most people. Hey, what's your goal body weight? Oh, it's 180. Cool, let's eat 180 grams of protein. I really don't find myself having to change up the protein very much. If you're doing kilograms, that's about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram. So as an example, if we have another one, a 150-pound goal weight, we're going to do 120 to 150 grams of protein. None of this nonsense of 200 grams of protein. I don't care which sex. I don't care how much you're in the gym, because this is plenty enough protein to build muscle mass. All right. Why I don't push extremely high fat. And I would say I set fat lower than most practitioners are going to set fat. And I have my own reasons for that. This is where people are going to disagree with me, and it's fine. So fat is essential. We do need dietary fat. You have to have it in your diet. We need essential fatty acids. We need fat-soluble vitamin absorption. We need cholesterol as a precursor for steroid hormones. But that doesn't automatically mean that more is better. Fat contains 9 calories per gram, as opposed to the 4 calories per gram in protein and carbohydrates, which means dietary fat is over twice as energy dense. From a pro-metabolic perspective, I often find that higher fat diets are going to crowd out carbohydrate intake. And if you don't know why that's a negative thing, please go listen to any of my episodes where I talk about carbohydrate intake and why it's so, so important. They are the preferred fuel source, especially for high intensity activity. So if you're an athlete, you need carbohydrates. They're also the primary fuel source for your brain under normal conditions. And we're not talking about starvation conditions. We're talking about normal conditions. I hope you're not in starvation conditions. Congratulations if you're listening to this podcast while also under starvation conditions. I really hope you're not on a mountain somewhere just starving to death and listening to this. Carbohydrates are stored as glycogen. And glycogen status is going to massively influence thyroid hormone conversion. It's going to influence training performance, your recovery, and your perceived energy levels. For most clients for fat, you can do 0.25 to 0.4 grams per pound of body weight. It works well for most of my clients. I'll only do that 0.25 if they've adjusted to higher carb intake. Okay, so that's a bit aggressive for someone who may be eating 60, 80 grams of fat a day without realizing they're intaking that much fat. The 0.25 times their pounds and body weight is pretty low. So that's usually someone that's been working with me for a little while. They're really used to the carbs. They're feeling good with the carbs, and they might be looking to lean out a little bit extra. We can take fat down a smidge. All right, so if we have a 150-pound individual, they would need around 38 to 60 grams of fat daily. That's enough to support hormonal health, but it leaves lots of room for meaningful carbohydrate and protein intake. So with how do we calculate carbs? This is going to sound stupid, dummy, simple, because it really is. Once your calories, your protein, and your fat are established, and you've been going through this and writing all this down, your carbohydrates are going to fill out the remaining calories. That sounds so simple, but I have found it to be largely true. Now, if someone is starting to struggle with things like low energy or poor recovery from training, things like that, I might partition a little more of the calories away from fat earlier and put them into carbs. But for the most part, you can follow the equation that I listed and just use the rest of your calories for carbohydrates, which should make up the majority of your diet. So whatever calories are remaining, you just divide that by 4, and that's going to give you the number of grams of carbohydrate that you need. So if you have a 1900 calorie target and you're doing 140 grams of protein and 50 grams of fat, you multiply 140 times 4, and you get 560, and you multiply 50 times 9, and you get 450, and that gives you 1010 calories. So the remaining calories are 890, and you just divide that 890 by 4, and it's going to give you approximately 223 grams. So that's how I arrive at my carbohydrate targets. After fat and protein are accounted for, carbohydrates become the body's most efficient fuel source. Research consistently shows higher glycogen availability improves training performance, recovery, and repeated high intensity efforts. As someone gets used to eating more carbohydrates, we pay attention to their hunger and energy levels to determine if they ever need to go up on carbohydrates. And spoiler alert, they always need to go up on carbohydrates. Always. I can start someone with these basic calorie and macro calculations, and over time, their metabolism adapts and they start getting more energy and they start moving more and they start feeling better. And over time, we usually just graduate. The carbohydrate is where we want the excess calories coming from. We don't want excess calories when someone says, I'm hungry, or hey, this calorie amount is not feeling right, I need more. You don't want to add more to fat necessarily. You don't want to add more to protein because it's a stable, consistent number, unless if their body weight goal changes. You add it to carbohydrate every time. All right, how do we calculate hydration needs for a person? It's surprisingly straightforward. So, practical starting formula, body weight times 0.5 to 0.7 ounces. So, if we have a 170-pound person, they would need around 85 to 120 ounces daily. And then you're going to adjust for things using your brain. So if you're in Florida and it's 100% humidity and you're running a marathon, you're going to need more water. So climate, exercise, sweat, illness, all of those can increase the amount of water that we need. In my experience, it's not really an issue if someone is thirsty and they want to drink more than this target. But we want to make sure they're drinking at least this target for fluid ounces. And if they feel really, really thirsty and they're telling me they need more water, go ahead and drink more water. The purpose of hydration is not simply to avoid dehydration, okay? Because hydration is important for a lot of different things. For our blood volume, our cardiac output, our temperature regulation. It's literally how your body cools itself down. Nutrient delivery and exercise performance. So this should be something that we're chasing every single day, just like the macro and calorie targets. We need to chase a water target and not wait until we have mild dehydration. All right. Sodium. Boy, does this get nuanced. So the general population sodium recommendation of less than 2,300 milligrams per day is not based on optimizing athletic performance, hydration, exercise recovery, or metabolic health. I just want to repeat it, okay? General population sodium recommendation of less than 2,300 milligrams per day is not based on optimizing athletic performance, hydration, exercise recovery, or metabolic health. It is primarily based on reducing hypertension and cardiovascular disease risk at the population level. Okay? We're talking general population here. We're not talking about Susan, who's 32 and weight lifts 5 times a week and has a very clean, low sodium diet of minimally processed foods. So where did these sodium recommendations come from? In the United States, the current dietary guidelines recommend limiting sodium to less than 2,300 milligrams per day for adults. That rationale, pardon me, is coming primarily from research showing that reducing sodium intake tends to lower blood pressure, particularly in, and I just find this funny. It's a general recommendation for the population, but it's shown to lower blood pressure in individuals with hypertension. Older adults, people with kidney disease, especially advanced kidney disease, or salt-sensitive individuals. Is it necessarily appropriate for the entire population? Like cure-all Band-Aid style sodium recommendations? Not necessarily. So organizations such as the American Heart Association have even advocated targets closer to 1,500 milligrams per day for certain populations. And the logic is straightforward, I suppose. A higher sodium intake can increase blood pressure in some individuals. Keyword some individuals, and elevated blood pressure is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. The challenge is that when we move beyond blood pressure and start looking at overall physiology, the picture becomes much more nuanced because sodium is important for a lot of things. I got really Italian there. Is lower always better? I would say no. Okay. And this is a main thing I run into in clinical practice is someone could be on a really, really clean, minimally processed diet and not getting a lot of sodium. And if they're feeling like trash, one of the first things I do is say, hey, could we put about maybe a quarter teaspoon or a teaspoon of salt into your water? And they light up like it's the 4th of July and go, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so much better. Several large observational studies have found what appears to be a J-shaped, or more accurately described U-shaped relationship between sodium intake and health outcomes. So in other words, very high sodium intake may increase risk. Very low sodium intake may also increase risk. And the lowest risk often occurs somewhere in the middle. One of the largest data sets came from the PURE study, which followed over 100,000 individuals across multiple countries. And the investigators found that the lowest cardiovascular risk was often observed in people consuming approximately 3,000 to 5,000 milligrams of sodium per day. That finding remains controversial, obviously, but it challenged the idea that lower sodium is always better. It's challenging that. All right. Why are athletes different? Most sodium recommendations assume relatively sedentary individuals. If you can't tell, I'm really animated about this because most of my clients that I meet with are not truly sedentary individuals. And it's pretty rare that I get a client that is truly sedentary. Athletes lose sodium every time they sweat, and sweat contains much more sodium than people realize. Typical sweat sodium concentration is approximately 500 to 2,000 milligrams of sodium, which is a lot. There's tremendous variation. Some individuals are called salty sweaters, and you can point them out because they have like salt stains on their hats and clothing. They're going to experience cramping a lot more, and they're going to feel significantly better if you give them electrolyte replenishment. This is a me thing for sure. If I feel like garbage, I can drink some salt water and I almost immediately feel significant relief, especially if I'm feeling kind of lightheaded. But I would identify as a salty sweater for sure. All right, let's do a real example. So let's say someone weighs 170 pounds and they exercise for 60 minutes and they lose 1 liter of sweat. They might lose 1,000 milligrams of sodium during that single session. And now imagine something worse, like a 90-minute football practice in the summer heat with multiple training sessions. Losses can easily exceed 2,000 to 4,000 milligrams of sodium in a day. So suddenly that 2,300 milligram intake recommendation looks really poor. I don't think that that's talked about enough. I don't know who I would blame for that not being talked about enough, but if someone's only eating, I saw a client today that only had 856 milligrams of sodium naturally present in her foods all day long, and she doesn't salt her foods or take electrolytes. Like, that can be a real problem physiologically. And this is a lot of people that do have low sodium diets without realizing it. All right, so what do Sports Nutrition Organization recommend? What do they recommend? The American College, sorry, it's been a long day. The American College of Sports Medicine is going to recommend sodium-containing fluids, especially during prolonged exercise, because sodium maintains plasma volume, it supports hydration, it improves your fluid retention, and it reduces the risk of hyponatremia, which is a massive problem for athletes. It's a medical condition where the level of sodium in your blood is too low, and specifically it drops below 135 millimoles per liter. And for athletes, recommendations are often expressed as 300 to 600 milligrams of sodium per hour of exercise. And then for heavy sweaters, people are known to be heavy sweaters, 500 to 1,000 milligrams per hour is more appropriate. That's a lot. Especially, I mean, that's if you're practicing multiple hours a day, you might need 2,000 additional milligrams of sodium, and we don't talk about it. All right, so how do I think about sodium in practice? For a healthy adult who's exercising regularly, I generally think in ranges rather than absolutes. And we kind of talk about the symptoms of being low on either hydration or sodium. And I try to have a discussion about them being able to either increase or decrease their sodium depending on how they're feeling. And you can test this out. If you're like, well, how do I know how I'm feeling? What do I do? Try a sodium amount and stick to it for a few days. Track your foods and look at the amount of sodium. And if you feel pretty good on 3,000 milligrams of sodium a day, try 3.5 and see how you feel. If your fingers start feeling like they're swelling up with lots of water and your rings don't fit, you've probably gone too far. But if you're getting lightheaded and you feel low energy and you're getting headaches, you might be too low on sodium. So a sedentary adult needs around 2,300 to 3,000 milligrams per day in my experience. Active adults need anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams per day. And then very active individuals need around 4,000 to 6,000 milligrams per day, depending on their sweat losses. And this is just my personal experience with working with clients. Endurance athletes, boy howdy, it depends on what you're doing. I work with some real psychos that work out all day long, especially in the Texas heat, and their sodium requirements really, really high. I don't even want to say it on this podcast because someone will come after me, but potentially much, much higher than those ranges that we were just talking about. So if you are really pushing yourself in the heat and you're an athlete and you're doing this many, many times in a day, I really encourage you to look at your sodium intake because it might be really low. Okay, just to close this out, is there a research-backed optimal amount of sodium? The truth is no. There is no universally optimal sodium intake that's been established. The best supported answer is that sodium needs vary dramatically between individuals. Sweat losses can increase your requirements substantially. Athletes generally require more sodium than sedentary individuals. Extremely low sodium intake may not be beneficial for everyone. Emphasis on that one. And medical conditions, just to cover ourselves here, medical conditions like hypertension, kidney disease, heart failure, or physician-directed sodium restriction changes the equation significantly. And if you have a physician-directed sodium restriction, please abide by that, please. How do you know metabolism is improving? So this is why I have a job as a dietitian, is sort of understanding these things in more of a nuanced way, but I'll try to give you a breakdown at least. So we don't simply watch scale weight. We look at physiology. Positive signs that metabolism is improving are things like warmer hands and feet, improved body temperature, improved energy, improved recovery, better sleep, more stable hunger throughout the day, improved training performance, better mood, higher libido, improved menstrual function, improved digestion, increased spontaneous activity, which researchers again call NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And the one that I notice first for most clients is for sure hunger comes on a little bit, and then warmer hands and feet, where someone might feel like they're suddenly a thermos and they're retaining heat a lot better, and they're not cold if they're in a room that has kind of a normal temperature, like 72 degrees. Whereas, especially for women, the small framed women, they might need like a sweatshirt just chilling inside on a summer day. you should see your temperature adjust accordingly when your metabolism is improving and you're eating enough calories to support your body warming itself up. Improved energy is just fun when you see people start having more energy and they literally look and tell you they feel different in appointments. And then training performance is obviously fun when you're working with athletes and they can suddenly bench more or they're running faster. Any of these things are great. When do I adjust calories is a question I get all the time. So, just generally, okay? I generally am going to evaluate adjustments every 2 to 4 weeks, which is when I usually see clients anyway, so it's kind of convenient. Not every 2 to 4 days. We're not adjusting calories every 2 to 4 days. What are you doing? That's not enough time to get real evidence back of what you're doing. People react to normal day-to-day fluctuations, and that's what we want to stay away from. Body weight is going to fluctuate several pounds from things like glycogen changes, sodium intake, hydration status, bowel movements, inflammation from training, digestion, like normal digestive processes. You can gain or lose a pound of weight overnight, especially in women with the erratic hormone cascade. Like, you can see an increase or a decrease in 1 or 2 pounds literally overnight. So I much prefer to have someone try to reach their calorie targets and macro targets consistently for 2 to 4 weeks before we change anything. And I definitely prefer weekly weight averages and trends over multiple weeks as opposed to like, oh, I hopped on the scale today and I'm up 2 pounds. Let's stop everything. It's not working. Wrong. All right. And I will say the goal with watching these trends and understanding what's going on with your body is not to react. It's to assess and change things if we need to, because we're running a science experiment on your body. And we're not always going to get it perfectly correct the first time. We can get really close with these calculations, but watch and see what your body's doing, assess and change. It doesn't have to be catastrophic. If we followed a certain amount of calories, protein, carbs, etc., for 4 weeks and we gained a pound, okay, we know that something needs tweaking and that's fine. All right. This last section is just going to kind of talk about more tweaks that we can make. If weight loss is occurring and biofeedback, those things that we mentioned about metabolism increasing, all of the biofeedback signs are good. I'll repeat the situation again. Weight loss is occurring and biofeedback is good. We do nothing. Okay. It sounds obvious, but people sabotage themselves and you hate to see it, but they get impatient and they want to lose fat or just general weight way too rapidly. And the amount that I like to see is 0.5 to 1 pounds per week if someone is just knocking it out of the park and doing everything correctly. If they're sleeping well, recovering well, their strength is stable, their hunger's manageable, their energy is good, we want to lose around 0.5 pound to 1 pound per week. There's no physiological reason to reduce calories further, okay? The body's happy with this amount of calories. We're losing weight steadily. Nothing has shut down in a sense. Keep it the same. Making additional cuts is going to increase the likelihood of excessive hunger, not needed excessive hunger, poor recovery, muscle loss, and reduced adherence. No surprise. If you put yourself on an 800 calorie diet, you're not going to adhere. And I will say one of the most underrated coaching skills is sitting with being uncomfortable. If someone is not happy with their rate of loss at 0.5 to 1 pounds per week, sitting through that uncomfortable feeling and telling them I don't think we should change anything. I think it's working, and reassuring them, and not just hastily changing macros because someone's upset that they're not losing weight quicker. Like, just sit there and try to reassure and be comfortable being uncomfortable. be uncomfortable being uncomfortable. All right. So what happens? This is another scenario. What if weight loss is stalling, but energy is excellent? Energy feels good. This is where we want to look at adding activity before we reduce food, right? We use those calculations for a reason to sort of determine what is a person of your age, sex, weight, height, what's a reasonable amount of calories for that. And this is a good rule to follow anyway. If your energy is good and you're enjoying the amount of food that you're eating and it seems reasonable, please look at the level of physical activity first before you make massive cuts to your calories and wreck your metabolism. Calories are going to influence more than body weight. Please remember that your hormones, your training performance, your satiety, your mood are largely based on the number of calories that you're getting in a day. So if someone's eating a reasonable amount of food and they're feeling great, there may be less physiological cost to adding movement than from cutting calories. And it's where I usually like to go first is, hey, if we don't have a step goal, let's establish one. If there's a step goal already, let's add 2,000 to 3,000 on top of that and see what happens. Usually it works. Add short walks after meals can help too, or just increase average daily movement. Like if someone is maybe weightlifting 3 times per week, but they're only doing it for 20 minutes, I might have a discussion and say, hey, we might need 45 minutes 3 times per week. This is usually where people want to fist fight me, is if I suggest, hey, let's see what happens if we walk just 15 minutes more in a day. But I don't care if they want to fist fight me if it means protecting the calories and just encouraging them to move more, because a lot of people could use moving more. It helps a lot of things, especially digestion. Another reason why I'm typically gonna suggest walking over cutting calories is and over just other forms of physical activity that might be more intense, is because walking tends to have a lower recovery cost than adding more intense exercise. I don't want someone just breaking out into HIIT training if they've plateaued with their weight. Also, walking doesn't dramatically increase appetite, which is really nice. You can add extra steps typically into someone's day and they won't have this noticeable, just dramatic, I need to go eat something right now effect. All right. What if hunger is excessive? You'll see people trying to willpower through this a lot. And I totally disagree with that. If you're having excessive hunger, it's data. And the question is kind of what's causing it. So, first thing I would want to do is assess protein. It's consistently the most satiating macronutrient. Okay. Research has repeatedly demonstrated that higher protein intake improves satiety and it reduces spontaneous food intake. I love that phrase, spontaneous food intake. Like, it's just funny to me. If protein is low, hunger often improves simply by increasing protein intake. So you can move it up slightly if someone is just feeling like they're starving to death and they need more. The second thing you can assess is meal timing, okay? You could be unintentionally creating hunger. If you're skipping breakfast and you're eating very little during the day and you're consuming most of your calories at night, that's not how your body works. It wants fuel all day long. So if I see someone only eating 1 or 2 meals a day, or they're spacing it all towards the evening, one of the first things we do to address excessive hunger is like, could we have a snack maybe? Usually works. Assess your sleep. I'm guilty of this, especially lately. Sleep is one of the most overlooked factors in hunger regulation. Research has shown that sleep restriction can alter hormones involved in appetite regulation. Boy, howdy, it does. When sleep decreases, hunger often increases, cravings often increase, food reward increases, and decision making worsens. So you're not making good choices about food when you're massively sleep deprived. And then the fourth thing, if you're massively hungry and can't figure out why, assess your stress. Stress can influence eating behavior through multiple pathways. Some individuals are going to eat less under stress, but many individuals eat more. Chronic stress is going to increase food preoccupation, cravings, emotional eating, and desire for highly palatable or comfort foods, right? Sometimes it's not that someone needs a macro adjustment, it's that they need to sort of calm down and manage their stress a little better. What do we do if recovery is poor? If a client is reporting fatigue, poor recovery, declining performance, poor sleep, we don't want to lower calories. One possibility is that energy availability has become too low. Research in athletes has shown that inadequate energy availability is negatively going to affect recovery, performance, hormone production, thyroid function. And sometimes the correct response in that case is more calories and not less. Boy, howdy, have we covered this in so many episodes at this point. It's just kind of driving the point home. What are some signs that my calories may be too low and we need to adjust up? So if someone is really truly constantly hungry and they're never once feeling satiated or full at any point during the day, that's a problem. If they're cold, if someone's just feeling cold in general, you hear someone say, I'm cold over and over again, that could be a real problem. You probably need more calories because it's literally how we generate heat. Low energy, poor recovery, increased food obsession. Yo, if you are just constantly thinking about food all day long, a little amount is fine. If someone's like, oh, I wonder what my next meal is going to be while they're eating their current meal, that's okay. But if you're just sitting at your desk, like dreaming about fruit tarts, we got a real problem. We probably need more calories to be honest. Reduced libido is a big one that I see a lot. Loss of menstrual function, that should be an obvious one. You should be having regular periods if you're of the age, and if you're not eating enough calories. Likely. I mean, it can be other things, but you could be under eating calories. All right. What this is what everyone always wants to think is going on, but is rarely the case. But signs calories may be too high. Rarely the case in my experience, by the way, which is extensive. All right. With some signs that calories exceed current needs are going to include consistent weight gain over several weeks. So if you set your calories and you're following it for 4 weeks and you gain a little weight and then you go, oh, I wonder if I was just stressed or not sleeping well or I wasn't walking as much. Let me try another 4 weeks and you gain some more weight. Your calories might be too high. If your body measurements are increasing, if you have lack of hunger between your meals, you could be overeating at each meal. If you're consistently feeling overfull, right? Those all kind of make a lot of sense. We do want to look at trends. So please don't look at one isolated day and suspect that your calories may be too high. They might be too high for that day, it feels like, but see how you feel over 4 weeks and then reevaluate. To wrap things up here, a good nutrition plan is not one with the fewest calories. It's the one that creates the best balance between results and physiology. And those results can be slow. And a lot of times they are. And we kind of want them to be slow. We don't want to be, since I work with a lot of weight loss clients, we don't want to be losing more than a half pound to a pound a week. And that's okay. And if you just share with people that that's the rate at which that we want to go, you can calm them down and they can focus on the long-term goal. That's really important. Like we said in the beginning, calorie prescriptions using these types of calculators should be viewed as a working hypothesis. It's kind of fun in that way. It's not a permanent answer. And a lot of times you're going to have to adjust. The body is going to provide feedback. That's also a fun thing that happens. And the job is to learn how to interpret the feedback and adjust as necessary. Thank you for listening. If you want personalized guidance and a pro-metabolic approach that's tailored to your life, you can book a session with me. My link is going to be in the show notes. Thank you so much again, and take care.